Jamie's Corner burst onto the scene, from my point of view, back in March 2022, and I've never really seen anything like it. There was editing, there was music, there was sound effects, there was even a little intro logo, and it seemed like proper YouTube, proper old school YouTube, but she was talking about animal rights and veganism. And since then I've been watching a lot of her videos, and she's been going from strength to strength. Now, I've been vegan for about 4 years, and cast my mind back to late 2023. I wanted to do more. I had done bits and bobs of vegan content on Instagram, YouTube before, but I watch a hell of a lot of vegan animal rights activists and creators, and I wanted to do more and do my bit to help the animals. So I started sending some messages out to some of my favorite creators, just saying like, hey, my name's Ollie, I do design stuff, can I help you in any way? And someone that replied to me was Jamie Logan. And the intro she already had was actually pretty good. It wasn't a case of like a blank slate or someone that didn't have any knowledge of branding or anything. But sometimes when I see something static, I, like the animator in me, just wants to see it move. I just want to see it build in. And also the name Jamie's Corner was kind of sparking these different ideas in my head about what that could mean. And I felt like the original intro was pretty basic and didn't really get across what that name could mean. So we hopped on a call, and as I've said before, this is my time to tease the ideas out of her brain. Figured out she wanted something really short. She also has a podcast, which at the time had kind of different branding, and we agreed that we wanted them to both be in line. She liked the pink, and overall she liked her existing branding. So that told me that this was going to be more of an evolution rather than a revolution. Stage one of any project is do some research. So went on Google, find a bunch of reference images and just drag them into folders. I also like to go on Dribbble, which is like a design website, because sometimes it can be nice to see other designs people have made. And the things I was kind of looking up were, Jamie's really into street art, so I was looking up some graffiti, street art, stickers, posters. She's also a New Yorker, and if you're familiar with her content, you will probably be able to tell it is very New York. There is quite, and I've been to New York quite a few times. In upstate New York is where the summer camp is that I work at during the summer. But New York City is quite an interesting place. There is a lot of different people that live there. Some of them are a little unusual. So I knew that we had to get some New York in there. So I was looking up imagery from New York City and Brooklyn. And the imagery that was kind of emerging in my head was, what if Jamie's Corner is actually a street corner? And what if on the street corner, that's where she films her interviews with people, and maybe upstairs inside the building is where she films her podcast. And as at this point, I did a sketch. Very, very rare for me to do drawings freehand. But I did a little kind of storyboard sketch of what this animation could look like. Some imagery of street signs and a street, and maybe the camera goes down the street, ends on the street sign. I think one day I need to get a graphics tablet or an iPad or something, because this can be helpful, and I know it's something I do need to improve on. Stage 2 is to do some very rough designs in Illustrator, experimenting with this street sign idea, keeping the text quite bubbly and chunky because we wanted something quite lighthearted and fun. I blocked out a version of the street corner in Blender just to test and see how the camera could move and the perspective would change. And I did a basic drawing of this podcast scene. Showed these to Jamie, and then it was feedback time. I also gave her 2 options for the typeface I used, the bubbly one and a slimmer, more condensed one. which is more similar to the real street signs, but less fun. And I couldn't decide. So top tip, if you can't decide, let the client decide, because I could have been there for ages trying to pick between these two, but ultimately I could have picked the wrong one. And I didn't know whether Jamie wanted something more fun or something more serious. Another top tip, presentation matters. It might be tempting that when you finished a design, you think it's really cool and you can't wait to show the client. It might be tempting just to screenshot it or to just drag the images into an email and send it off as quick as possible. But remember that everything you send represents you. So taking a bit of extra time just to lay things out nicely on artboards, add some description on the side, I think is really worth it, because that extra bit of effort shows that you really do care about the work. Back in Blender, I modeled a version 2 of the street, added some big skyscrapers in the back, added some trees just so there's a bit more color in the scene, and also this cute little blocky man, which I used as a size reference. So I made sure he was average size for a man, and then could compare him to the other objects in the scene, because I knew that although this is going to be a very stylistic street, I wanted it to be roughly proportionally to scale. Now came the tricky part. This is the bit I've been putting off for a while, because as you know, I'm not an illustrator. So I knew that these clips of Jamie couldn't just stay as video clips. I knew that we had to somehow convert them into cartoony versions of her. Because she liked the cartoon illustration in her original logo, I knew that that's one of the elements we were going to keep. So after a lot of testing in After Effects, I basically figured out a way to just use a bunch of different layers, each of them with different effects on, to try and isolate different colors, different shades from light to dark, assign each of those shades a different color, and give it like this cartoony painted effect, which obviously it's still a video underneath, so it still moves as she moves. And that was kind of one of the key elements of what I wanted to get into this intro, was to get across more of her personality than just one static frame. The inspiration from the street art and the graffiti I managed to get in there from these spray paint assets. Top tip, use assets. Don't be afraid, it's not cheating. If you're not already subscribed to one of these asset libraries already, recommend you do. It's cheaper than just buying individual assets. The one I use is called Envato Elements. No real reason for that, so there's others out there. I'm not saying it's the best, but I was familiar with it because they also make Audio Jungle, which makes a lot of music that's popular with creators. You pay a subscription fee and then you basically have unlimited access to all the kind of assets you want, whether it's fonts, stock imagery, textures. I use it for a lot of textures. I don't really use the templates much. I feel like as a designer, they're not aimed at me, they're aimed at non-designers. But in terms of textures, it would take me ages and wouldn't really be worth it if I went out, bought spray paint, some big paper, set up a camera, filmed me spraying it on and scanned in images and stuff. That would be cool and probably quite fun, but overkill for a lot of projects when you can just spend 10 quid a month or something and just have 50 assets just at the click of a button. So once I got a first pass of the cartoony bits done, went back into Blender to do a third version of the street. And this is kind of why I call myself a digital creator, because I get bored of doing the same thing over and over and over again, or even just the same thing all day. So I love combining all these different elements and all these different mediums, whether it's animation, graphic design, filmmaking. They all have different programs. You make them all in different programs. And that really helps me with the boredom aspect, because I can go from Illustrator for a bit, jump to After Effects for a bit, jump to Blender for a bit, jump to Premiere for a bit, and that is what I love to do. This kind of modeling is quite nice because it's quite simple. Modeling inanimate objects like buildings reasonably straightforward, so I just had to smash it out. It did take a very long time, but managed to do it. I focused on just doing obviously the corner building first, and then a few other buildings that I could then reuse down the street. Took a lot of inspiration from Brooklyn, because that's where Jamie's from, and of course had to include the iconic fire escapes, which whenever I see them in images or in person, it reminds me of that scene from Friends with Joey and Ross.
Should I climb down your front so we're face to face, or should I climb down your back so we're butt to face?
Face to face. Face to face.
Also added the very American yellow traffic lights. The background is just a photo of a real sky. That's why it looks quite nice and realistic. And I also wanted some sort of fog, because I knew that I didn't want to model these buildings forever. So I wanted to use fog to give it the sense that they probably do go on forever, but you just can't see it. Now the fog, some of the fog features in Blender can be very processor intensive, and in this case they weren't actually suitable because they were going to stop me seeing the buildings that are far away, but also because the sky is far away, it was going to block out the sky and it would just be white. So I figured out a workaround, basically just faking it, where I just created a circular radial gradient that goes from yellow to transparent, lowered the opacity, and then just built those up down the street to the point where you could no longer see all the way through them. And that created quite a nice fog effect. For the Jamie's Corner podcast, I modeled a simple room that's kind of loosely based on her podcast setup. Put that room inside the corner building on Jamie's Corner and open the window. So then I could have the camera move up, move through the window, and then we see the podcast setup and the podcast logo animates in. And we were almost done. Showed it to Jamie and she said she liked it generally. She was less keen on the first two faces, and she thought the third face, which she did like, needed to be a bit more cartoony. And to be honest, this was not the feedback I wanted to hear, because it meant more illustration. So I went back into After Effects, trying to figure it out. I didn't want to give up. And after a bit more testing, I realized I'm just going to have to draw this. I'm just going to have to trace over this video frame by frame potentially, and just that's the only way to make it into a cartoon. And luckily it wasn't actually too bad. I realized that to make something look cartoony, you don't have to make everything like flat and blocky. Started with just the eyes, just redrawing the eyes and the eyelashes, and immediately that made a huge difference. So then just did the mouth and some small details on the nose and the chin, and I was happy. I used some of the spray paint assets of paint being sprayed on as transitions, as like masks, to have these elements appear and to have them disappear at the end. I also did a bit of sound design. I really like doing sound design, and any opportunity, I'd love to go in there, download a bunch of sound effects, another thing you get from these platforms, and then just in Premiere, just like shrink the video tracks and just go, right, layer up all these different sounds, which if Jamie decides, it's optional to kind of keep them. If Jamie decides to use them, you'll be able to hear some sounds of New York City traffic. You'll be able to hear the shaking, the lid and the spraying of the spray paint can, and some little sound effects like pops and whooshes as the things move around. And that's how I created this animated intro for one of my favorite animal rights activists. I think it turned out really nice. I really enjoyed the whole process. If you saw the Just So You Know podcast intro I did, that was good, and I liked how simple and clean that was, and it suited the style very much. But I think this is slightly better. I think the extra textures that you get from the spray paint is quite nice to have kind of a multimedia effect where you have the 3D clean 2D elements in the sign and the logo, and some rough 2D elements in the spray paint. And also this project is just pink, 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 which, as you can tell, I've never complained, never had too much pink. And what do you think of this intro? I want to know if you like it, which bits you like, which bits you don't like. I'm always open to constructive criticism. So maybe you see it and you go, oh, it'd be cool if this happened. Or if there's a part you see and you're like, how the hell did you do that, Ollie? Then message me, comment down below, and I'll happily explain. And have you seen Jamie's videos before? If not, go check out her channel, Jamie's Corner. They're very good. And you might even, on the most recent uploads, you might even see my intro at the start. And thanks for it. I gotta go water my peace lily.